Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fine Print. Today, we continue part 5 of the India series by discussing some key events that took place in the Indian independence movement after the major Battle of Plassey. Join us as we uncover the notable stories that made up the Indian independence movement and how they contributed to a rising India. After 1757, the British had largely consolidated their rule in India, prominently in Bengal, with the establishment of a puppet Nawab. Yet they looked outward to expand their regional influence and attempted to colonize the entirety of India and soon Afghanistan. Their first and probably their most significant opposition was the Maratha Empire. At the time, the Maratha Empire was ruled by the Chhatrapati, or the Emperor. However, the Peshwas, or the prime ministers under the Emperor, held significant power. The most prominent of the Peshwas of the time was Bajirao II, who led the Marathas in the Third Maratha War. If the British managed to defeat the Marathas, they would successfully establish a strong empire throughout northern India. But their defeat meant that Britain would be restricted just to eastern India and may face the threat of being completely expelled from the subcontinent. The First Maratha War was not a war of territorial rights, but more so on the matter of succession in the empire. While the Marathas wanted to crown Madhav Rao II, Britain wanted to crown their own puppet ruler. The war ended in a peace treaty that recognized Madhav Rao II as the rightful successor to the throne. The Second and Third Wars, however, were much more complicated, with disputes about Britain's territorial expansion. The end of both these wars favored the British side and allowed them to establish dominance in North India. The Second Maratha War consisted of decisive British victories and treaties with the Maratha Empire that gave Britain control over Delhi and much of central India. The Third Maratha War, however, saw the crushing defeat of the Maratha Empire. British forces brutally defeated the Marathas, the Peshwa was dethroned, and the Confederacy was dissolved, giving Britain access to the vast territory of the Maratha Empire. Our next subtopic for this episode is the abolition of Sati. Sati was a practice that was carried out in India ever since its earliest days of civilization. Sati was a Hindu practice that stated that after a husband's death, the now widowed wife would be required to sacrifice herself by stepping into her husband's funeral pyre. Although this process involved a complex reasoning process, it was nonetheless extremely inhumane. Thus, starting in the early 19th century, the movement for the abolition of sati officially began in India. Social activists, notably individuals like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, advocated for the abolition of sati, ensuring greater women's rights and the end of unjust practices against women. Many British officers were also anti-sati, aiming to stop the spread of this practice by imposing strict rules and regulations in Hindu societies. Officially, in 1829, British Governor-General William Bentinck issued the Bengal Sati Regulation that made the practice of sati illegal in India. Strong promoters of this abolition were more modernized Indians, Christians, Muslims, and Western travelers who believed in women's rights and the intolerance of any kind of violence. However, strong critics to the Abolition Act came notably from Indian villages, where the practice of sati was largely tied into their religious and cultural beliefs. Nonetheless, the abolition of sati served as a key event in British India's history that set the stage for future social activist movements against gender inequality in India. Apart from social changes, India saw many political and militaristic changes as well. The most notable of them was the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. The Sepoy Mutiny occurred as a result of the discovery of beef and pork fat in the gun cartilage of Indian soldiers. Since most were Hindu or Muslim, the beef and pork fat went directly against religious beliefs. Thus, the Indian sepoys revolted against the British. However, their rather weak forces led to a decisive British victory that permanently established a British stronghold in India till the next century. In summary, the time period between the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the Indian Rebellion of 1857 covered an entire century of British colonization, transferring from indirect colonization to the direct colonization of India that continued for another century until India's independence in 1947. If you liked today's episode, be sure to keep following Fine Print. On the next episode, we'll be talking about the partition of Bengal and the Amritsar massacre that fueled the independence movement. Until then, keep following Fine Print for new episodes every other Friday, and keep reading between the lines.